There's a photographer who shot 10, 15 rolls a day, every day for 30 years. That's roughly 500 frames in a single afternoon. He became, in the words of John Sarkowski, curator at the MoMA for almost 30 years, the central photographer of his generation. Not one of the best, the central one. And when he died, they found 2,500 rolls of film in his studio, undeveloped. He knew they were there. He didn't forget them. He just didn't develop them. That detail has been sitting with me for a long time. Because once I understood why he did that, it changed how I think about photography completely. And I think it might change something for you too. Gary Winogrand was born in the Bronx in 1928. And by the 1960s, John Sarkowski, the most influential photography curator of the 20th century, called him the central photographer of his generation. Not one of the best, the central one. He shot constantly, obsessively. 2 cameras around his neck sometimes, one loaded with black and white, one with color. 10, 15 rolls in a single afternoon. That's roughly 500 frames in one afternoon. And here's the first thing that stopped me cold. He deliberately refused to look at his contact sheets for months, sometimes over a year. He had a very specific reason. He said he needed enough distance from the moment so that he could see the photograph instead of remembering the experience of taking it. Think about what that means. He was actively trying to forget the feeling of pressing the shutter, so he could see what was actually on the film, not what he thought he captured, not the memory, but the image itself. I think most of us do exactly the opposite. We check the screen before we've even lowered the camera. There's a quote of his I want you really to sit with. I photograph to find out what something will look like photographed. Not to make beautiful images, not to document the world, not to say something important, to find out what something will look like photographed. That sounds simple, it isn't. He's not saying the photograph is a record of reality. He's saying the photograph is a completely different reality, something that doesn't exist until the camera creates it. And the only way to discover what that thing is to go out and make it. You can't think your way there, you can't plan for it. That's almost a Zen position. And it starts to explain the 2,500 rolls. If the discovery happens in the street, in the moment, with a camera in your hand, then what comes after it is almost administrative. But there's one more layer here. One, I think, is the real key. For most of his career, Winogrand shot color, not just black and white. His color book, which I have here, covers nearly 20 years of work. Photographs that look almost nothing like the Winogrand most people know. Warmer, more intimate, less like a statement, more like a glance, catching someone in a moment they didn't know they were in. He was also doing commercial work, assignments, advertising to pay the rent, and something interesting happened when he talked about that work. He didn't say it was worse, he didn't say he enjoyed it less, but there was a quality the personal work had that the assignments didn't for him. It wasn't about skill, it wasn't about effort, it was about where the work was coming from. And I recognized that immediately because I went through a version of that same thing. I tried commercial photography for a while. Not for long, but long enough to notice what it did to the way I moved with a camera. The images were technically fine, competent, sometimes actually quite good, but they didn't feel like me. They felt correct. what you needed to do in order to get paid. And what I eventually figured out, and what I think Winogrand understood deeply, is that the moment you're making photographs for an outcome, something changes. You stop discovering and start executing. You stop asking what something will look like photographed and start trying to make it look the way you already planned. In Buddhist philosophy, there's a concept called upadana, usually translated as grasping or clinging. The idea that suffering comes not from experience itself, but from clinging to its outcomes. And in photography and in any creative work, that grasping has a very particular texture. You can feel it in the images. Winogrand seemed constitutionally free of it. He moved through the world with enormous appetite and almost no attachment, which is harder than it sounds, because appetite without attachment means you care intensely about the looking and almost not at all about whether the looking turns into anything. Here's where the 2,500 rolls finally make sense to me. What bothers people about those undeveloped rolls is that it feels like incompletion. Like a book never finished, like work abandoned, but I think that's wrong. Winogrand died at 56, so quite young. Heart failure while on a teaching trip to Tijuana. And those rolls were in his studio in Los Angeles, not forgotten in a drawer somewhere. Present, accumulating, a physical record of how many afternoons he had shown up to look. He wasn't planning to develop them later. He wasn't postponing the work, I think. He had already done the work. In Zen practice, there's a word, shoshin, beginner's mind, the instruction to approach even deeply familiar things as if you've never encountered them before. To walk down a street, you walk down 1,000 times and still see it. Experienced photographers often lose that skill and habit layer over perception. You see what you expect to see. You make the photograph you already know how to make. Winogrand shot like someone who had never seen a street before. Technically accomplished, trained, experienced, genuinely expert, but somehow still innocent. Every frame, every roll, every afternoon, as if for the first time. The undeveloped film wasn't failure. It was proof he never stopped the only thing that really mattered to him. I notice what result checking does to my own shooting. You go out, you come home, you find the 2 or 3 frames that worked, and the next time, without quite meaning to, you're already looking for that again, trying to repeat the last good thing. Street photography doesn't work like that. The street gives you what it gives you on its own schedule, on its own terms. What Winogrand had and what I think the 2,500 rolls were really about was a complete trust in the process itself, not the results. The act of going out, being present, paying attention. 2,500 rolls of, let's say, pure trust. I'm not saying don't look at your photos, but maybe there's a question worth sitting with before you go out next time. Are you going out to see? Or are you going out to find something you've already decided you want? Because I think these are very different walks. Thanks for watching and see you in this video here, because YouTube thinks you will like it too.